So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez went on The View today, and she was a pretty long interview that she did. If you guys have the time, you should go and watch the interview for yourself. There were some good parts of the interview, like when she was defending Bernie Sanders and his record, and she was advocating for certain progressive policies like Medicare for All. But there were definitely some parts of this interview that I did not like at all, and are definitely worth criticism, and I don't know if anybody else is going to do it, so here I am today. Now, those of you who closely follow progressive news and other lefties in new media, a couple months ago, there was several stories about Whoopi Goldberg, host on The View, taking shots at AOC and Justice Democrats, and most of it is just bullshit, hacky nonsense, criticisms that are just silly. But one point that she just keeps bringing up repeatedly is this thorn she has in her side, where she, basically to sum it up, she sees AOC and the Justice Democrats as a bunch of ingrates who are just new to politics and they don't know how anything works, and all they have to offer is criticizing the Democrats who have come before them and who've worked their entire careers trying to help the voters. That's one of the points that Whoopi Goldberg brings up continuously in the criticisms of AOC and Justice Democrats and really progressives and leftists across the country. In this appearance that AOC had on The View today, it was the first time actually being able to sit down with Whoopi Goldberg and hash this thing out. So Whoopi Goldberg brings this completely shallow, silly argument. She brings it up with AOC, and AOC's response, in my opinion, was just really bad.
I was very happy when you were elected because I thought it was a great step in a good direction. And then you lost me because it felt like you were saying to people like me that I was too old and didn't do enough to make, well, that's what it sounded like. And so that has bothered me because I feel like I love young people. I was once one. But you're on my shoulders.
Absolutely.
And we have carried this fight. People like, Nancy Pelosi, who was the only chick in the room for years. And Madam Feinstein, who was the only chick in the room for years and had to deal with all of that stuff. And to sort of hear it sound like you were dismissing us bothered the hell out of me.
Of course.
She's been very upset about it.
And I've been very upset about it for a long time. So do you think maybe they misunderstood what you were saying? Did I misunderstand what you were saying? Because I read the blurb on the website, so maybe you can clarify.
No, of course, and I appreciate you sharing that with me because I think.
Well, I figured everybody else probably already.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that with me, and I think that that's something that we have to model more in politics. I work very closely with my sister Rashida Tlaib, and one of the things that she says is that we're not divided, we are disconnected. And the way that we connect is by sharing honestly our takes with each other. But that being said, first of all, I think there's a lot of incentive to blow up disagreements in the party as like huge fights, because I think it's important for us all to recognize, and we do this in our rallies, to recognize the people who have been in this fight to allow us to have this window as we do right now. Nancy Pelosi, that's Mama Bear of the Democratic Party, And, but also women like Barbara Lee, Jan Schakowsky, Maxine Waters, my chairman, Elijah Cummings. May he rest in peace and in power. He, especially, I sat on his committee in the Oversight Committee, and he did so much to center us and uplift us. And that is so unusual be in a place that revolves around seniority. So I think it's important to say that, but also to say that part of, I think, youth and culture, it's always been seen and cast as rebellious, but ultimately we are not a moment that is disconnected from our past. We are part of a long movement of ancestors and elders that we should always acknowledge.
Cool. And so the next thing I have to ask you now, you know, are you a Democrat? Are you like an African American? Do you know what I mean? When people say African American, we say, no, I'm an American. Don't hyphenate it. Are you a Democrat? Help me understand, because it's the same issue I have with Bernie. You know, I understand that there are a lot of places people can live in this party, but I feel like you must come in as you want me to see you. And you must come in up front. So are you, explain what kind of Democrat you are. That's what I'm asking.
Let me start by saying this, and I feel like this shouldn't even have to be said, but I'm gonna say it anyway just so it's on the record. Whoopi Goldberg, nobody gives a flying fuck about your feelings. We're here to talk about policies. We're here to talk about ways that we can objectively improve people's lives here in the real world, people who are struggling. Nobody cares if the words we use and how we get our point across is hurting your feelings and make you feel some type of way. You are a very well-off multi-millionaire. You will be just fine. Nobody cares if your feelings are hurt. Because really, that's what this entire criticism and line of questioning is coming from. That Whoopi Goldberg feels personally offended by some of the things that AOC and other progressives have said. Now, to continue on that, if you have watched the rise of AOC, you've watched the rise of this populist, leftist, progressive movement in the Democratic Party, and your main takeaway is that it's just a bunch of ingrates who are complaining and don't know anything about politics, just hurling insults at people who are supposed to be on our side because we just are ignorant and we don't know better and we're entitled and we think that they should have done more, then you just aren't paying attention to the movement. That being said, AOC's answer to this incredibly hacky and silly question was just shitty. Because what did she do? Not only did she pretend like this is a legitimate, valid criticism to make of AOC or any other progressives, by co-signing Whoopi Goldberg's vapid analysis of politics of, oh, Nancy Pelosi, she was the only woman in the room for a very long time, and Dianne Feinstein was the only woman in the room for a very long time, as if by definition that means you're fighting for the working class people in this country. No, that's not what it means. It doesn't mean that you're fighting for working class people. It doesn't even mean that you're fighting for women in this country. Because you know what Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein were doing the whole time they were the only woman in the room in politics? The two of them were selling out at every chance they got. Selling out to Big Pharma, selling out to the private health insurance industry, selling out to the business class, blocking and doing everything in their power to block workers' rights and to block raises to the minimum wage, doing everything in their power to fight actual, serious, aggressive proposals to address the climate crisis. AOC co-signs Whoopi Goldberg's vapid analysis of Democratic leadership by saying stupid shit like Nancy Pelosi's the mama bear of the Democratic Party. First of all, what the hell does that even mean? And secondly, this is where the title of this video comes up. She is downplaying the divisions in the Democratic Party. She is trying to act like this civil war between the corrupt corporatist establishment wing of the Democratic Party against the insurgent populist left progressive wing of the Democratic Party, uncorrupted wing of the Democratic Party. She's trying to act like that's not a real thing and there's just some minor differences between us. No! Nancy Pelosi is just as much your enemy as Donald Trump or any other Republican. That's just what it is. If Bernie Sanders is elected, she will fight tooth and nail to make sure that a $15 minimum wage does not get passed in this country. She'll fight it just as hard as she's been fighting the increases in minimum wage for her entire career. How many years has Nancy Pelosi been Speaker of the House or minority leader in the House? And how long has it been since we've had an increase in the minimum wage? The federal minimum wage is $7.25. So for over a decade at this point, Nancy Pelosi has been at the top of the Democratic Party, either in the position of the Speaker of the House or Minority Leader, and she has put up no fight to get a living wage in this country. And it's because her corporate donors don't want it. And if Bernie Sanders was president, she would fight you just as hard as any Republican would fight you to make sure you didn't get a living wage, which Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez so fervently cares about. When AOC came out and introduced the Green New Deal, one of the most dramatic left-wing proposals to address the climate crisis ever to be introduced. But when you introduced the Green New Deal, what did Nancy Pelosi do? What did the mama bear, as you call her, quote, the mama bear of the Democratic Party do? She dismissed it. She scoffed at it. She said it's never going to happen. And she mocked you and said the Green New Dream or whatever it's called. So why are you going out of your way to pretend like Nancy Pelosi is an ally to the left or progressives in any way? How many times have we seen Nancy Pelosi just overtly going out of her way to undermine Medicare for All? There were multiple stories that came out last year about Nancy Pelosi sending out her top staffers to coordinate with lobbyists from the private health insurance industry on ways to prevent Medicare for All from happening. And her own top staffers were going out there telling the Democratic caucus in the House, reading them talking points straight from lobbyists from the private health insurance industry as to why Medicare for All isn't a good idea. So, when Nancy Pelosi introduced pay goal and all these new rules when she became Speaker of the House that would make passing Medicare for All as well as other progressive policy priorities incredibly hard to do because of budget considerations. So at every turn, Nancy Pelosi fights the priorities you say are most important to you and most important to your voters and most important to working class people in this country. So why on earth do you pretend like those are just small, minor disagreements? She is not our ally in any way. So the only correct way AOC could have answered that question, that shitty question from Whoopi Goldberg, was like, look, Whoopi, I never made a personal attack against you. If you feel offended in any type of way, that's on you. But as I've been saying, as the people in my movement have been saying, Nancy Pelosi is corrupt as shit. She's doing the bidding of the corporations and her corporate donors to maintain the status quo, and the status quo is screwing over millions of Americans in this country. Nancy Pelosi is in favor of 40,000 people dying every year because they can't afford basic health care. Nancy Pelosi is just fine with over 40 million people in this country not having any kind of health insurance. She's just fine with millions more people having health insurance but still not being able to afford going to the doctor. She's just fine with that because she and the party that she's in charge of takes millions of dollars from the private health insurance industry. So yes, I have criticism for Nancy Pelosi. I have criticism for the rest of the corporatist establishment Democrats in the party. And if you take that personally, if you feel personally offended, I don't know what to tell you. That's the only correct way AOC could have answered that question, in my opinion. And this isn't the first time that I've seen AOC downplay the civil war that's going on right now for control of the Democratic Party. This is not the first time she's done it, and this is why I'm doing this video now. And it isn't just AOC that has this problem. Bernie Sanders does this from time to time too, and basically every elected progressive you can think of has done this at different points throughout their career and throughout this new left-wing movement that's been going on since 2016 or 2015. And to me, it just looks like a lack of courage. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that AOC and Bernie Sanders and all these other progressives aren't. I know that to do what AOC does takes tremendous courage. I don't know if you guys know this, but the amount of death threats that AOC and Bernie Sanders and other politicians receive is tremendous. Every day, they have to, in the morning, go through death threats, hundreds of death threats, with their staff and decide which are credible threats that need to be investigated by the FBI or other law enforcement agencies, and which ones aren't that credible and should just be ignored. That takes courage to come out every day and do what you do, knowing damn well you're going to get death threats from legitimately unhinged people. That takes courage. I understand that. It takes courage for AOC to be advocating for Medicare for All, advocating for getting private money out of politics, when she is currently in a political climate where that is seen as heresy, and anybody saying those things are a radical fringe lunatic. So yeah, it takes courage to advocate for the policies that AOC advocates for. But at certain points, they lack the courage to say the truth because they're afraid of either personally offending members of the Democratic Party, leadership of the Democratic Party, or elitists like Whoopi Goldberg, who are status quo defenders, or they're afraid of potentially offending some voters in the Democratic Party who may just see this as petty infighting or whatever it is. And here's why I say it's a lack of courage. When it comes to people and figures that are easy to hate, Bernie Sanders and AOC, they have no problem just saying just how it is. No sugarcoating, nothing like that. Bernie Sanders is known for this. Donald Trump is the most corrupt president of our lifetime. He's so corrupt. He's corrupt. He's corrupt. He's corrupt. That's not a lie. That is completely true. He's serving the interests of the establishment. He's serving the interests of corporations. He's serving the interests of millionaires and billionaires who contribute to him and contribute to the Republican Party. So to say Donald Trump is corrupt, that's a no-brainer, 100% true. But also, that's incredibly easy to do because very few people like Donald Trump. And the people who like Donald Trump are easy to portray as villains. But when it comes to figures in the Democratic Party who are just as corrupt, possibly even more corrupt than Donald Trump, then Bernie Sanders wants to walk on eggshells and he wants to sugarcoat it. And in some cases, he'll flat out lie. Like with the whole thing with Zephyr Teachout and Joe Biden. His own campaign surrogate lists very straight to the point ways how Joe Biden has been insanely corrupt throughout his career. And completely objective, completely factual, indisputable, but still Bernie Sanders comes out and undermines his surrogate and says, flat out lies and says, I don't think Joe Biden is corrupt in any way. Well, hold on. Zephyr Teachout shows you, hey, Joe Biden took money from the credit card industries and the financial institutions, and all he did in his career is push for deregulation that will put more money into those industry pockets, even though if it screwed over the majority of this country, the working class in this country. Joe Biden is taking money from the private health insurance industry, and what do you know? He's against single-payer healthcare, even though it would cost less, cover everybody, and there would be the 40,000 people who die every year because they can't afford basic healthcare, that number would be zero. Joe Biden is against it because he takes money from the private health insurance industry. All those are clear-cut ways of corruption. Bernie Sanders, if you replace Joe Biden's name with a Republican's name, he would say that is corruption. But because of the lack of courage, he lacks courage. He doesn't want to say that about someone who is his personal friend. He doesn't want to say that about someone who some voters in the Democratic Party may personally like and see that as an attack against him. So even though it's objectively true, it's factually true that Joe Biden's corrupt, Bernie Sanders he won't just come out and say it because he lacks the courage to come out and say it. With AOC, Nancy Pelosi is clearly corrupt. You ran this whole populist campaign, firebrand lefty, taking on the corrupt establishment, but yet while you're there, you can't just say Nancy Pelosi, who has been the head of the Democratic Party for close to 2 decades now, you can't say she's corrupt. If you can't say she's corrupt, then who's corrupt? Then what did you run your campaign on to end the corruption in the Democratic Party if there's nobody in the Democratic Party you can say is corrupt? So they know that it's true that Nancy Pelosi is corrupt as all hell and she's serving the interests of her donors and corporations, but they just won't say it because they're afraid of whatever backlash they think they're going to get. So in that specific context, it shows the kind of spinelessness you see from a lot of elected progressives, Bernie Sanders and AOC and others too. They're not willing to say what we all know is 100% true because they don't want to offend somebody or they don't want to get on somebody's bad side. And the reason why I played the very next question that Whoopi Goldberg asked AOC after she answered her original question about dismissing the elders of the party. The reason why I played that was because it goes to show you that this is all just disingenuous nonsense, and no matter what you say, because like I said, AOC was just pandering to Whoopi Goldberg and the other status quo defenders of the Democratic Party and acting as if they've been on our side at any point in their careers. She did all of that. She panders to them. She kisses their asses. She did this whole song and dance for Whoopi Goldberg, and it doesn't move her an inch. You know what the very first question that they asked AOC when she got onto this interview? Somebody asked her, hey, Bernie Sanders isn't a Democrat. Can you explain why he should be the Democratic nominee? So it was the same, hacky Bernie's not a Democrat even though he represents Democratic voters nonsense. And then what did Whoopi Goldberg do right after AOC did the song and dance for her and try to pretend like Nancy Pelosi isn't corrupt as shit? She moves on to the very next recycled attack against progressives. Are you really a Democrat though? As if AOC didn't just do the song and dance for her. So this is like the point that a lot of people in new media have been making. You gain nothing from doing the song and dance. You gain nothing from pandering to them because their criticisms are disingenuous. They're not focused on policy. They're not focused on the actual substance of what you are advocating for. They are just elitist millionaires who are trying to defend the status quo at all costs because they know if you get your way, if the populist leftists in the party get their way, then it'll be a hit to their wallet. It'll be a hit to their friends who have made a career of selling out the Democratic Party to corporate donors and to moneyed interest. So they'll always have some nonsense excuse for why they can't actually get behind you. So stop trying to convince them. So this was definitely not AOC's best interview. There were several parts where I feel like she just dropped the ball and she did not make the best case that she could have. And yeah, I know it's live TV. I've been on live TV and live radio, and I know that in the moment, it's hard to make the very best arguments you can make, but still, AOC, you have to do a better job because this was shit. And more than that, I think she just is not as much of a fighter as she needs to be. She's willing to make concessions, and she's willing to do a song and dance for elitists in the Democratic Party in hopes that one day they'll accept her and welcome her into the Democratic Party.